Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching India Tonight with me, Sumita, Kareer. I'm back with the show that deep dives into the biggest stories of the day. And tonight we put our focus on what's happening in the Middle East, while Israel and Iran have agreed to accept US President Donald Trump's ceasefire proposal to end their 12-day war that roiled the Middle East. But that was not without its share of drama. Shortly after the ceasefire was announced early today, both sides accused each other of violating the ceasefire. Then US President Donald Trump expressed his unhappiness on his social media platform, Truth Social, and said that Israel and Iran both violated the ceasefire. And he also said that he was really unhappy with Israel. He also called Israel to stop dropping bombs and quote-unquote to bring your pilots home now. Soon news came in that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu assured Donald Trump that there will be no more attacks on Iran. Meanwhile, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian too said that the country will respect a ceasefire announced by the United States President Donald Trump, provided that Israel also upholds its terms. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that volatility also reflected in how the Indian markets moved today. The Nifty opened 200 points higher than yesterday's close, and it touched the 25,300 mark, but it couldn't really sustain those gains. It ended from the day's high of 25,317 mark. So the big questions that we're asking on the show tonight: what do these moves that are happening in the Middle East, what does it really mean for the markets and investors? Will the current ceasefire hold? And can the United States rein in Israel? We will go to a live guest to decode some of those questions and, of course, to get their views on this very crucial story. But let's first listen into what US President Donald Trump had to say when he said that he was really unhappy with the Israel ceasefire violations.
I don't think so, but I'm not happy that Israel is going out now. There was one rocket that I guess was fired overboard. It was after the time limit, and it missed its target. And now Israel's going out. These guys got to calm down. Ridiculous. I didn't like plenty of things I saw yesterday. I didn't like the fact that Israel unloaded right after we made the deal. They didn't have to unload. And I didn't like the fact that the retaliation was very strong. But in all fairness, Israel unloaded a lot. And now I hear Israel just went out because they felt it was violated by one rocket that didn't land anywhere. That's not what we want, I'll tell you. And I'm telling you, I'm not happy about that, Israel, either.
So will it be business as usual in the Middle East, or are there more surprises on the anvil? To decode that and, of course, some other points of analysis, I'm now joined by Alistair Newton, the CEO of Alavant Business Advisory Limited, and Mark Chandler. He's the Chief Market Strategist and Managing Partner at Bannockburn Capital Markets. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on ET Now. Let me first come to you, Mr. Newton. Will there be a ceasefire or not? That is the most important question at the moment, even though both sides have accepted that they're going to follow the ceasefire. But the real question is, will Trump be able to enforce a truce between both the sides?
I really hope you don't expect me to give a 100% certain answer to that, given everything we've seen even in the last 48 hours. But I do think it looks like we are going to get some sort of pause in dropping bombs, firing missiles, and so on and so forth. But I have to say that there are a lot of reasons to suppose that this may not hold for a protracted period of time, let alone that we might see lasting peace between Israel and Iran. Let's keep in mind that somewhere, and nobody seems to be quite sure where, Iran has roughly 400 kilos of 60% enriched uranium. It is believed by the intelligence agencies to have stockpiled as yet undeployed high-tech centrifuges. On the one hand, on the other hand, Benjamin Netanyahu has not achieved his objective, his long-standing objective of definitively removing any threat of Iran using a nuclear weapon against Israel, insofar as Iran might wish to do that. So there's good reason for both sides maybe to take a time out, but I wouldn't count on more than that at this stage.
Right, Mr. Newton, so you're essentially looking at a protracted period of volatility, given the fact that the ceasefire might not hold. Let me take that point across to Mr. Chandler. Mr. Chandler, what in your view is going to happen are you bracing, for a protracted period of volatility, given the fact that today was a completely volatile session? What are investors factoring in from here on, as far as these geopolitical moves are concerned?
I think that the tail risks, a week ago, even over the weekend, the tail risks, people were concerned about the possibility of World War III. And that risk seems to have diminished markedly. Of course, this talk of a 12-day war between Israel and Iran really misframes what I think has happened. Israel has first destroyed or decapitated the proxies Iran has used, Hamas and Hezbollah. And so when Iran was not in compliance with the UN on limiting its enrichment, it gave them an opportunity, the Israelis an opportunity to do what I think they wanted to do for quite a while, and that is to, if not destroy completely, at least set back the Iranian nuclear program. And some estimates suggest that it has been successful in setting it back 5 to 10 years, killing scientists, destroying infrastructure. So they might not have destroyed the uranium, the enriched uranium, but it does look like they have dealt a setback. There is a fundamental difference of views between Iran and Israel. Israel, as you know, has nuclear weapons. The countries that don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons are primarily, Russia had said earlier this week that other countries are prepared to give Iran nuclear weapons. And I think that for those of us who really take seriously non-proliferation, the U.S. strategy, the Israeli strategy has only underscored the importance of countries getting nuclear weapons. Nobody bothers North Korea, for example. And so I am concerned that, as the professor said, that this does not end anything. It's a fragile ceasefire, but the geopolitical differences of opinion, different interests remain intact.
Absolutely. And we'll have to see the kind of moves that all of these sides are going to take, even as all three sides are proclaiming a victory in this 12-day war. But let me come to you, Mr. Newton. When we talk about, when you said that there's going to be a period of volatility and the ceasefire might not hold, and that's essentially also the view that Mr. Chandler is also holding. What do you think is Israel looking at achieving now? What are its ambitions in the aftermath of this 12-day war? And most importantly, will Donald Trump be able to reign in Israel, given the fact that today's violations also happen from the side of Israel?
Well, I think as far as Benjamin Netanyahu is concerned, his objectives remain as they have been since pretty much the 7th of October 2023, to assert Israel as a regional military hegemon, which, as Mark remarked, he has done to a large extent by at least temporarily defanging Iran, and certainly defanging Iran's proxies, with, let's remember, the exception of the Houthi, who have only received minor attention from Israel and the US to date, and are still a very active military force in the Yemen region and its immediate environs. So I don't think Netanyahu has actually achieved his ambitions as yet. And of course, his other factor is a personal one, which is that if the government falls, which it could well do once there is a complete cessation of hostilities, he may well find himself in court over the ongoing corruption case against him, with the possibility of finishing up in jail. So Israel still potentially a live issue. As far as Iran's concerned, primary objective clearly maintaining the regime, avoiding regime collapse. And I think the mullahs have decided that the least bad way to move forward towards that objective is to cease hostilities for now, at least, regroup, and, as Mark suggested, probably, at least I think he suggested, I want to be careful not to misquote him, probably in due course to start again with a new and even more secret uranium enrichment program.
Okay. So there could be a more secretive enrichment program that could happen in Iran. And of course, we do know the comments of the IAEA chief. He was speaking to one of the media channels, and he said that this attack might not have completely destroyed Iran's nuclear nuclear enrichment facilities. So, of course, that fear pertains. But, Mark, let me talk to you about markets and, of course, investors. Should investors at this point be looking at moving out of equities, at least in the near term? And, of course, that there's going to be a period of market volatility, especially from the Middle East angle. And then you have, if it's not the Middle East angle, then you also have the July 9th deadline when relief on reciprocal tariff ends. And of course, we do know about Trump's clash with the Fed. So we don't know where how that will really play out. So what should strategically investors do as far as navigating this period is concerned?
Yeah, I think you're right. You know that there are a lot of unknowns, like there always are in the markets. We had a U.S. pundit once said something like, "It's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future." And so I think investors are best served by managing risk. You know, people don't make money so much by getting it right. What they really do, successful traders really are able to minimize their losses. It's really about risk management. And so even like today, where you say there's a lot of volatility, typically volatility goes up when the markets go down. When stocks sell off, volatility goes up. The U.S. S&P 500, it looks like it's braced to return to record highs it saw earlier this year. Gold, despite the uncertainty from the Middle East, gold is down large, $60 an ounce. If it's a large move for gold, and oil is down. So I think the markets are calming in many ways. Volatility is easing. But I think you're right. There's a lot of uncertainties coming up in July. The so-called reciprocal tariffs are one of them. And we're always, you know, with the U.S. current president, we're just like one social media post from more volatility in the markets. But again, I think that equities, for many investors, long-term investors, equities are still really the preferable place to be. You know, today we have Chairman Powell speaking before the U.S. Congress, and he's really distancing himself from recent comments from two other governors who President Trump appointed, who talked earlier last week, about the possibility of a July rate cut. The market seems much more confident the Federal Reserve will cut rates in September, not July.
Right. Right. And that, of course, is playing out between Donald Trump and, of course, the Fed chief as well. Donald Trump has been attacking him because he's not cutting rates. So we'll have to see how that really pans out. But a period of extended volatility persists. At least in the United States, and its impact will also be felt on global markets as well. But Mr. Newton, when we talk about the Middle East situation and the fact that, you know, Donald Trump announced that ceasefire, what do you think was the off-ramp that was offered to Iran to get to a point where it has agreed for a ceasefire, given the fact that the United States, it actually attacked its nuclear bases? So what sort of a face saver was Iran given to possibly agree for this ceasefire, even though it is conditional on Israel's actions?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily been much of a new face saver as yet. Iran's face saver most immediately was launching a number of missiles in the general direction of a US base in Qatar, warning the US beforehand. Very similar, as I think the media has well documented, to what Iran did after the US assassinated Soleimani in 2020, was it, or 2019? I can't remember. But a very similar run of events. What Iran will be looking for now is some sort of deal with the US which gives it sanctions relief. And of course, that has been very much on the table in the negotiations to date, the 5 rounds which have taken place, albeit some of them being proximity talks between the US and Iran, brokered by Oman. And I think Iran will be very keen to get back to the table. I think there will have been at least some sort of implicit, if not explicit, wish of that, and to push for sanctions relief. Now, whether it will get that, and I think this is still a sine qua non for Tehran, and still be allowed some uranium enrichment, not necessarily to 60%, but low enriched uranium. I think that's where Iran will be looking to go in the immediate future in negotiations with the US.
Right. Mark, let me come to you. I mean, if Iran agrees, will we see more of Iranian oil in the market, given that perhaps trade is the carrot that Donald Trump is known to often dangle to get deals done? And we also just heard that Donald Trump say that China can continue buying Iranian oil.
China, President Trump can tell China what it can do. China gets about 15% of its oil from Iran. China's Iran's biggest customer. So I think that the U.S. basically had previously threatened to put tariffs, very high tariffs on countries that bought Iranian oil, which is basically part of the U.S. Trade war with China. But I agree with Mr. Newton about that Iran's long-term strategy still to acquire nuclear weapons. I think that we have to assume that rational actor, it's in their self-interest. And I think that they have to bide their time. This is an existential crisis for it. And so I think that the mere fact of surviving is what it needs to, what it wants to do right now. And I think that, we have to be careful too. Where the U.S. has intervened in the Middle East, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, these countries, the type of regime change has been very bad. Had, I should say, negative consequences. And I worry that if the Ayatollahs were overthrown in Iran, we got their regime change, who is the most organized, capable group to take over from the Ayatollahs? It would seem to me it's the Revolutionary Guard. And I think that's even more nationalistic and more committed than perhaps even the Ayatollahs to this nationalistic strategy. So I worry that it's really like what might be called kabuki theater. The U.S. dropped a dozen bombs the size of school buses on Iran. And the impact on its nuclear program seems to be questionable. Clearly, it doesn't. Well, I think most people now agree that it wasn't successful in destroying that 60% enriched uranium. And so I think that this is a theater that the U.S. struck so it could position itself as a negotiator. And then I think that what the Iranians have done, as Mr. Newton has suggested, is also just signaling and part of this de-escalation. So yeah, I'm not convinced that the U.S. Bombing of Iran really changed things. I think that Iran had previously wanted to have a ceasefire. It offered to re-enter negotiations once it stopped being attacked. And so I think this is all like part of this. It's weird with when we talk about war as being theater, but I think that's what's unfolding.
Right. Right. Right, gentlemen, I'll have to interject you at the moment, given the fact that we have to take a very, very short commercial break. But do stay tuned with us. We'll be right back and we'll probably discuss more of what's going on in the Middle East and the impact on markets. See you after a very short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're tuned into India Tonight. And of course, we're discussing what's happening in the Middle East. The U.S. President Donald Trump today came down hard on Israel and Iran for ceasefire violations. In fact, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has assured that there will be no further attacks on Iran. And of course, that back and forth also reflected on how market action played out today. Some early gains were there in the Indian markets, but they eroded as the markets closed. And of course, we are in conversation with Alastair Newton. He's the CEO of Alavant Business Advisory, and Mark Chandler. He's the Chief Market Strategist and Managing Partner, Bannockburn Capital Markets. Let me come to you, Mr. Newton. Given that the United States economy is expected to slow down, except that the dollar also remains volatile. Dollar has been a store of value and a store of safety for the last 30 years. It could perhaps be bracing for more volatile times. How are you anticipating and expecting the movement of dollar from here on, and of course for the rest of the year?
I think you really should be asking Mark that question, as I'm not a currency strategist. But I do think Mark was right earlier when he said that, I think it actually was you, Nisa, that you remarked on the 9th of July and the significance of that date, with all the tariff uncertainty still out there. And I do, as I've said on your program before, I do think that the Wall Street types of, with all due respect to Mark, continue to underestimate the potential impact of Donald Trump's tariffs. As far as I can see, on the equities side of Wall Street at least, very few strategists are taking account of potential retaliation by third countries. And I'm thinking particularly of Europe in this respect. There is no question whatsoever that if Donald Trump follows through on his threats against the European Union, which seems to be his particular bête noire, far more than China even, he seems to be prepared to do deals on China where perhaps he would not be prepared to make concessions to Europe, particularly over digital service taxes, VAT, and so on and so forth. Europe will retaliate. And we're now in this slightly alarming position. I hesitate to use the word nuclear option, given we've been talking about the Middle East. But of course, the European Union has its anti-coercion instrument. And assuming that Donald Trump's one big, beautiful bill gets passed into law, which is not a given at this stage, we've got Section 899 in that bill still, which in principle, at least, would allow Congress or the Trump administration to levy duties on investments in America against countries which individuals from countries which it took exception to over issues such as tax. And I do think that markets are probably underestimating the potential impact of Section 899 were it to come into law. I think we would likely see some nasty surprises coming out of that, because I do think it would be used by the Trump administration preemptively and not just as a threat or leverage in negotiations. Given all that, my answer to your question would be that I think we're going to see a lot more volatility in the dollar, and I do think we're going to see a more favorable and increasingly favorable view. We've already seen Euroland performing well this year in markets. I think that's a continuing trend.
Right. Mark, let me also ask you about, the FII movement. Today also we're given to understand that FII sold shares worth over 5,000 crores and emerging market flows have been rather patchy in, past many months. So are they expected to firm up here in India, given the volatility that's going to persist in the United States, whether it's on the markets front, the policy front, or on the dollar front?
Yeah, so I'm in the camp that thinks that the dollar's big bull market rally from basically the end of the great financial crisis through maybe about a year or two ago, that move is over. But still, the dollar is very overvalued. Last year, Europeans bought a record amounts of U.S. stocks. And I think that we're seeing a bit of buyer's remorse. And so there's a big portfolio allocation taking place. But I'm excited about the prospects for India. Last year, India bonds became included into some of the global benchmarks. And I think it's just a matter of time before the Indian stock market is as well. And this year, we're already seeing investors anticipate it. For example, this quarter alone, we've seen foreign investors buy Indian stocks while selling Indian bonds. And so I think this is a healthy sign of sort of the maturing of the market, and I think anticipating the integration of India into the global capital markets. That's the next big country to be integrated in the capital markets. Maybe it's 10 to 20 years behind China, but it's going to happen. I'm very confident it's going to happen in India. And part of it, though, the slowing is the reason it's taking a while, I think, is that India still has sort of pre-modern practices when it comes to capital controls, and a currency that's very closely managed, which gives the rise to non-market pressures coming to bear. But I think the dollar's in a big downtrend now, and I think I think that in my work, people have been worried about the U.S. sort of the decline of the U.S. empire, Pax Americana, what have you, since well before I was born. And I think that the danger does not come from encroachment, somebody replacing the U.S. like a China, for example, or an EU. But I think it's more of, and this is, I think, what I took away from Mr. Newton's comments too. The U.S. is shooting itself in the foot. It's not a question of encroachment, but abdication. Whether it's these clauses in the budget bill that'll punish countries for adopting, for example, the same kind of corporate reform that the U.S. advocated for at the OECD level. These tariffs, I think that, and as Mr. Newton, I think, correctly pointed out, the administration seems to be more hostile towards U.S. traditional friends like Canada and the EU than it is towards its traditional rivals like Russia or China.
Right, Mark. Well, on that note, thank you, Alistair and Mark, for joining us here and sharing your perspectives on where the markets are expected to move and whether the ceasefire that Donald Trump has announced, will that hold or not? And ladies and gentlemen, it seems like a volatile period is ahead of us, given the fact that this could very well be a very delicately agreed upon a ceasefire. We also heard the guest talk about it as well. But interesting moves ahead from the United States, given the fact that we are also nearing the end of the period when relief on reciprocal tariffs ends. How that story unfolds, that will also be interesting to watch out for. Meanwhile, let's take a look at how trade on Wall Street is panning out. Well, US stocks are opening higher as markets are betting on the tentative ceasefire between Israel and Iran holding firm. In fact, the Nasdaq has risen 1.2% to a session high. Oil prices also continue to retreat, with the United States crude down by over 5%, and this after a 7% plunge the previous day. The pullback actually lifted airline stocks, with United Frontier and Delta up by more than 2%. Chip makers also surged, led by Broadcom and Nvidia. The gains came in as President Trump attempted to preserve the fragile truce despite fresh tensions. And let's now take a look at levels the markets are trading. Wall Street is trading currently. Well, the Dow Jones is up by a massive over 365 points in trade. The Nasdaq, the tech-heavy Nasdaq, is up by over 230 points. And of course, a minor up move is also being seen as far as S&P 500, that index, is concerned. Of course, investors are looking and are positive on that ceasefire that's been brokered by the United States between Iran and Israel. Again, the big question remains, for how long will this persist, this ceasefire persist, and how will that really reflect on the markets as well? As of now, all major indices currently trading in the green, and we're seeing big moves coming in, especially from the Dow Jones and Nasdaq. And let's shift our focus to some other piece of news that's coming in. Well, in fact, let's stay with some more news coming in from the Middle East. Well, the Strait of Hormuz has been in news ever since Iran announced its plans to close down the oil corridor following the war with Israel. So why is this stretch so important? We explain it all to you here. In fact, my colleague Nivedna Prabhu is joining us with this explainer.
We begin today with a stretch of water that's just 33 kilometers wide, and yet it's tugging at the threads of global trade and energy. Let's head straight to the map to understand why the world is once again watching the Strait of Hormuz and what real-time congestion here is starting to signal. Right here, nestled between Iran to the north and Oman and the UAE to the south, lies the Strait of Hormuz. It may be narrow, but nearly 1 in every 5 barrels of global oil passes through this point. It's in fact the jugular vein of the energy economy. And this week, maritime traffic.
All right, let's now shift our focus to India, where the DGCA has conducted a comprehensive surveillance at major airports, and that includes Delhi and Mumbai. The focus was on safety measures and regulatory compliance. In fact, my colleague Samir Dikshit is here with more details on that story. Samir.
Yes, post the tragic aircraft crash incident in Ahmedabad, DGCA, the aviation regulator, is not just carrying out tough scrutiny of the airline, but also of the airports. What we are picking up from the officials that DGCA carried out intense surprise audit of the major airports across the country. So, for example, of Chennai Airport, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore. So these all airports, a safety audit was done by the DGCA. And shockingly, there were multiple safety violations that was found by the safety inspectors, by the DGCA officials. For example, at one of the airports, the central line of the runway, it was faded. Now, this central line actually helps the pilot to guide the aircraft properly, and this central line was faded. In another instance, at one of the places, DGC officials found that the simulator which is used to train the pilot, they were running on outdated software. Now, you can imagine that pilot training, that too on an outdated software of a simulator, that means that is raising a severe risk as well. Additionally, at multiple airports, DGCA officials found that the aircraft maintenance engineers, they were not following the mandatory safety protocols at a few places, at few airports. Even they were not able to follow the protocols, the safety protocols, how to actually maintain the aircraft. That manual or the guidelines, they were unable to follow it. Even in one of the cases, very shockingly, a domestic aircraft was supposed to take off with a worn tire. The tire was actually not in a very serviceable condition, and because of which DGCA official, they stopped that particular flight, and it led to the delay of that domestic flight. But it was put into service only after that particular tire was replaced. Now just imagine that how many safety lapses are there which has been found out by the DGCA official in their surprise safety audit. Now, these operators, they have been given a 7-day timeline to initiate the corrective action. In addition to this, they have also been asked to submit a CAP, a corrective action plan, whatever the it has been asked by DGCA, and this corrective action plan has to be submitted to DGCA. And not just this, going forward, DGCA will conduct this sort of surprise safety audit in coming months or days, and if these violations are found once again, then these airport operators may attract financial penalties, and also this can result to the cancellation of the license as well. But definitely that's a very shocking or the surprising part, that there are multiple safety violations at these airports, which has been highlighted by the DGCA in its safety audit report.
Right, Sami. So those are some very disappointing findings that have been revealed by this surveillance that's been done by DGCA with respect to flight operations, airworthiness and ramp security. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at some news now that's coming in from the Delhi High Court, which has ordered RSPL to remove certain derogatory phrases in its ad campaign of Ghadi detergent. Remember, this is coming in after HUL, which is the manufacturer of Surf Excel, filed a suit against RSPL. My colleague Nivedna Prabhu is joining in with the details. Nivedna, what was the suit exactly about, and what has the Delhi High Court ordered? What were some of the key takeaways from that hearing that went on in court today?
In a significant development, the Delhi High Court has ordered RSPL Limited, makers of Ghadi detergent, to remove certain derogatory phrases from its ad campaign. Now, according to the interim order dated June 20th, which was made public today, RSPL has been ordered to withdraw parts of the ad campaign by today. In fact, the order came on a petition filed by Hindustan Unilever, which sought an injunction restraining RSPL from disparaging the plaintiff's product Surf Excel detergent. And the court's vacation judge observed that certain phrases used were clearly derogatory and make negative innuendos. Phrases flagged include "ye dhoka hai" and "aapka karya badi badi baatein par dho nahi paate." Now, the court noted that comparative advertising is allowed, but mockery or misleading tactics cross a line. Now, let's also tell you that the matter is next scheduled to be heard on July 16th.
Right, Nivedna, thank you very much for bringing in all of those details with respect to the arguments that went on in court today. Meanwhile, in a move to drain additional liquidity in the banking system, the RBI has announced that it will hold a 7-day variable rate reverse repo auction on June 27th. As per the estimates, the current excess liquidity is pegged at about 2.4 trillion. My colleague Anurag Joshi is here with the details. Anurag, so what exactly is RBI's plan to drain additional liquidity in the banking system?
The Reserve Bank of India plans a 1 lakh crore rupee 7-day variable rate reverse repo auction on June 27. This will be the first auction of such kind since the RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra took office in December 2024. The RBI plans to drain excess cash in the money markets from the VRRR auction. There is currently an excess liquidity in the banking system estimated around 2.4 trillion rupees. This is according to debt traders, and the cash availability in the banking system has surged through 2025 following cash infusions through the RBI's OMO auctions, and also the rise in cash levels in the banking system due to the RBI measures. The rupee debt yields are expected to rise on Wednesday morning following the RBI auction announcement.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, time now for us to slip into a very short break. But after the break, we shift our focus on India's weight loss drug market. It is heating up even as Novo Nordisk has launched anti-obesity drug Wegovy in India. We tell you more about that story right after this short break.